think we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks for coming out today. Beautiful afternoon. I'm Casey Vance, the Executive Director of Ames Historical Society. This stationary cemetery walk is presented by the Ames Historical Society, Grandon Funeral and Cremation Care, and the Story County Genealogical Society. We're so happy to have you here today. The program seated here will have short monologues by each of the 7 women, and then we encourage you to visit each gravesite marked on the map in your program by a star, and each gravesite also has signs at them, so they're really easy to find. Now please join me in welcoming our first notable woman, Cynthia Duff.
Hello, my name is Cynthia Kellogg Duff. I came to Ames in 1863 with my husband Alexander and our children, Lockhart, Alexander Jr., and Norman. They were children of my husband's first wife, who was my cousin, Sarah Kellogg. We also took in Alex's niece, Elizabeth. I loved them all as my own, and all the grandchildren who came along. We came from Syracuse, New York. Alex came from Scotland, and his family immigrated to Canada before he moved to New York. The history books say we were well off financially when we came. I don't know about that, but we were able to buy 320 acres of land here. It was over there north of North Street, which we now call 13th Street, up to Templeton Street, which is now 16th Street. Meeker School is now there, and lots of other houses. We had a great farm. Alex cleared the land and farmed it. We built a beautiful house with huge windows. I'm sorry that house doesn't still exist, but I guess you would call that progress. Though I was all for progress. Why, this town wouldn't have the trains going through it every 20 minutes if it wasn't for me. I'm sure some of you might not be thanking me. I guess you could say I played a little trick on some of our upstanding citizens. Some of those big shots didn't think they wanted a big, smelly train going through town. I had become acquainted with John Blair from the railroad. We made a little plan. I would buy the land the railroad wanted, claiming it was for my uncle back east, but I just turned around and sold it to the railroad for the same amount of money I had paid for it. I didn't make a dime on it. It cost $3,775. About 20 acres of that land was platted as the original town of Ames, part of what we know as Old Town today. I later opened a restaurant on Main Street. The building is gone, but it was located in that little walk-through that you get from the parking lot south of Main Street up to Main Street, and it is called Cynthia Duff Plaza. What an honor. That restaurant sure was a handy place to feed all those men working on the railroad. The railroad did a lot of good for this town. It deeded 2 lots on the corner of 6th and Kellogg for a church to the Congregational Church Society. The building is still standing as the United Church of Christ. I'm so proud of the fact that I helped build that church with my own 2 hands. I also gave the church a communion set, which I brought from New York, and that communion set is still in the back of the sanctuary. That church has the honor of being the first church in Ames. As Alex and I got older and Ames was expanding, land was selling at a pretty good pace. We decided to sell off some of our farm. Alex was working as a butcher. He'd done that back in New York also, and our sons were butchers. We moved to Nevada in 1894, and Alex passed away 2 years later. I lived with family friends for a while until my health got so bad that I had to move to the county farm. I passed away in 1907 at the age of 83. Alex and I are resting a bit south of here. It's such a pretty place here, don't you think? I see 2 streets here in town are named after Alex and I. You might have already guessed, Duff Avenue and Kellogg Avenue. The main street here in town was originally called Onondaga Street, named after the county in New York where I came from. They changed that name back in 1910. Well, I'm so glad we've had this chance to talk. I'm very proud to be honored here with these other fine women of Ames. Thank you.
Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am Mary Greeley. I'm happy to see such a nice crowd here today gathered at my final resting place. I'm buried here along with my husband Wallace and my parents. And I was born Mary Victoria Young in Villanova, New York on February 20th, 1847. I was the daughter of John and Nancy Young and was one of 5 children. I had 2 brothers who were killed in the Civil War. You can imagine that that was a terrible time for my family. Shortly after the war's end, I met a lovely man named Wallace Greeley at the Teachers Institute in Ellicottville, New York. I have to say, he captured my heart. He was a school teacher, and he also had served in the war. He was in the 150th New York Infantry. Wallace and I made a commitment to get married and decided that we would move west to Ames, Iowa, like a lot of Civil War veterans were doing at that time. There were many opportunities in the West for young people who had ideas and energy. Late in the year 1866, Wallace left me in New York State to travel to Iowa to take a serious look at the town of Ames and to purchase some land for us to start a farm. There were only 100 people in the little tiny village of Ames, but a land-grant college had been established on a site to the west of town, and we thought that was very promising. Wallace had been very frugal with his Army pay and was able to purchase a 200-acre farm for $10 an acre. Imagine that. If you'd like to know where that farm was, you just have to travel out to the Green Hills Retirement Community and Gateway Hotel to stand at the place where we started our life together. Wallace returned to New York in November, and we were married on November 8, 1866 at Gowanda, New York. Oh, that was such a wonderful day. And we lived and farmed in that location south of Ames for 10 years until 1876. Ames was growing and creating new possibilities, so we decided to move to town. Wallace had gone into business as a private banker, and we bought a home at 11th and Douglas. 6 years later, in 1882, we built a fine, new, big home at the corner of 5th and Douglas. This beautiful house still stands 130 years later, but you'll know it as Adam's funeral home. Wallace and I loved the town of Ames. We became devoted to making it a good place. Wallace served as mayor, he was on the Ames school board, and he got elected as a state representative, in addition to running the Union National Bank on the corner of Onondaga and Douglas. Now, around the year 1900, Wallace and I got behind the drive to establish a free public library in Ames. A true moving force came from my sisters in my PEO club. We worked with Mayor Parley Sheldon to secure a $10,000 grant from Andrew Carnegie, and Wallace and I donated the land at 6th and Douglas. The citizens of Ames voted to accept the proposal for this library, and the library was established. It opened on October 20th, 1904. I was proud to be a member of the first board of trustees. And I mentioned my PEO chapter. It was chapter AA, and that group was so important to me. It gave me purpose and it gave me comfort in times of sadness. Wallace and I had 2 children, but they did not survive their infancies. This was a cause of crushing sadness to me and to Wallace. It caused me to become somewhat withdrawn and overly quiet. Our friend Seaman Knapp once remarked that he thought I was kind of antisocial. But that really was not the person I was. My PEO sisters helped me through that time. The library project and service as a library trustee gave me a way to come out of myself and be involved in the community. My PEO also offered social opportunities I might not have found on my own. One of my fondest memories of life in Ames was in February 1912, when I was hostess for a PEO music act. Mrs. Clyde Williams, Mrs. Meeker, and Miss Lydia Brown performed on the piano. I was permitted to demonstrate my skills by performing 2 pieces on my pianola. In case you don't know what a pianola is, it's a player piano. It was great fun for all of us. Oh, those were the best of times. I was a hostess for many gatherings and cultural events right in our home. Wallace was a successful banker and civic leader, and together we were able to give back in many ways to the city that meant so much to us. But then, toward the end of 1914, I began to feel extremely unwell. I had been battling a disease called pernicious anemia for many years. Now, of course, you folks know that this is a disease from a deficiency of vitamin B12 that causes low counts of red blood cells. But of course, that was not something that we knew at that time. Vitamins were just beginning to be understood then, and vitamin tablets were not available. The disease often made me feel tired and dizzy. And for much of December 1914, I slipped in and out of a coma. My beloved Wallace sat by my side for much of the month, and my sister came from her home in Michigan. Their presence was a great comfort to me during the times I was awake in my final weeks. I slipped away from this earth on December 31st, 1914, having lived for 67 years. Wallace, my poor husband, he was deeply shaken by my death. He felt that if I had had better care, perhaps I could have survived my illness. He resolved to build a hospital in my memory. The first hospital in Ames was dedicated on September 24th, 1916, and named Mary Greeley Hospital. It is such an honor to have a place like that named after me, one that has helped so many people and served as such a blessing to the community. I hear that it is now called Mary Greeley Medical Center and serves many people in central Iowa, way beyond the community of Ames. Imagine that. Oh, if only Wallace could see it now. He would be so proud. Sometimes I laugh a little to myself. When we were alive, Wallace was the one who was out and around and so well known. I myself, I preferred a quieter life. But now, everyone knows the name Mary Greeley, and not so many people know Wallace. Anyway, that doesn't matter. Wallace and I were both so happy to make Ames a better place for all of you. Goodbye now.
Hello. I am so happy to see you on this, the 101st anniversary of my death. I am Rowena born in 1852, often called Ina. I was one of 4 girls in my family. I came to Ames to attend Iowa Agricultural College in 1869. Today you call it Iowa State University. It's much bigger today than when I was here. There were only about 200 students then. 1873 was the year of my college graduation. That was only the second graduating class at the college. I learned much about the spirit of helpfulness, my capabilities, interests, and leadership during those college years. I developed strong camaraderie with Edgar Stanton, Laverne Noyes, John Stevens, Fanny Richards, and Maddie Locke during those years. After graduating, I taught school in Iowa and Nebraska. John Stevens and I married in 1876. John was a member of the college's first graduating class. We lived in Ames until 1893. Towards the end of that year, we moved to Boone. John was a lawyer, later becoming a district attorney and a judge. Our family included 7 children, 5 girls and 2 boys. One of our daughters died just a few weeks after her birth. That was a very sad and difficult time for us. In Ames, we lived at the corner of Douglas Avenue and 9th Street, where Old Town Park is today. It warms my heart to think that children are still playing where our children played and had so much fun. I remember them using the wicker and wood baby carriages filled with several children to sail down Douglas Avenue Hill from 9th Street towards downtown. Then there were those wild and fast rides on the hill with sleds. They sure did have fun. I had a long-time association with women's suffrage and loved organizing. I think I was born a suffragist. I worked with and provided leadership for the Equal Rights Society of Ames, Ames Political Equity Club, Ames Women's Benevolent Society, Women's Suffrage Association of Ames, the Boone chapter of Women's Suffrage, and the State Women's Suffrage Society. John and I hosted many dignitaries in our Boone home, including Teddy Roosevelt, Helen Keller, Anne Sullivan, and even British suffragettes. In 1908, I organized the first women's suffrage parade in America, held in Boone, Iowa. What a glorious event! With the Boone band, automobiles, banners, and delegates, we made our way from church to downtown Boone and back to the church. It was a sight to see. We were the talk of the town. About 200 people attended the parade. Women's suffrage was such a battle, but I worked with some remarkable women, including Carrie Chapman Catt, Eleanor Gordon, and Susan B. Anthony. We had high standards and were a persistent group, working on local, state, and national levels, always staying true to our convictions. Finally, in 1919, a year after my death, the constitutional amendment passed, and women could finally vote. I always felt education was very important, and even urged the Ames School Board to establish a public preschool or kindergarten. They refused, so I organized and ran a private kindergarten on 7th Street near our home in Ames. Because access to books is critical to education, I helped organize the first public library in Ames and served as a library board. We held many organizing meetings in the parlor of our home on Douglas Avenue. We called ourselves the Ames Library Association. I saw that women could not be independent economically without equal political rights. As a mother, I tried to prepare my daughters in every way and felt they should attend college. 1931 marked the date when my grandchildren were the first third-generation graduates of Iowa State College. John and I were so proud. In 1995, I was inducted into the Iowa Women's Hall of Fame. What an honor. I died on April 8, 1918. While alive, I could see the world beginning to change, and women's right to vote was an important part of it. I was thrilled that my daughters could vote after I and many others fought so hard to obtain rights for women. And look where we are today. Women are not only voting, but running for and serving in elected positions at local, state, and national levels. But there's still work to be done in the area of political equality. I hope you will all continue to carry on this important work. Thank you.
Hello, I am Winifred Tilden, and you can call me Win, just whenever you see me on the street. And my parents, George and Lydia Tilden, moved to Ames from Vermont in 1869. That was just like 4 years after Ames was established. They built a house at 915 Douglas in what is now the historic neighborhood here near downtown Ames. Back then, that neighborhood was pretty much all of Ames there was. I was born on October 8, 1880, the youngest of 5 children. So I pretty much had to fend for myself. My parents were very active in the small community of Ames. My mother, Lydia, served as the first woman president of the Ames School Board. And of course, my father had the Tilden store in downtown Ames. He started a partnership with D.A. Bigelow and Henry Huntington as soon as he moved to Ames. They were some of the first mercantile people here in this town. When I was about 3 years old, he decided to have his own business. Tilden's was a general store which sold groceries, clothes, and all kinds of things. It was really fun for me to walk through the store as a child. It was always so busy with folk getting their shopping done and looking at all the great merchandise. Now, my father died when I was only 11 years old. That was a pretty bad time. But my mother was a strong woman, and my brothers also stepped up. My 3 brothers, Lou, Galen, and George, took over the store operations with my mother. It continued to be a successful business for many decades after that. In fact, I heard that it did not close until 1971 when my nephew Clark finally retired. Perhaps some of you even remember shopping there. As a young adult, I was always interested in physical activity. I once rode my bicycle to Des Moines with my friend Tot Bigelow, the daughter of one of my father's original business partners. Oh, it took us 4 hours, and the dirt roads were really rutted and muddy, but we just kept at it, and we made it all the way to Des Moines. In the summer of 1903, my sister Mame and I went on vacation in Colorado. It was a lovely time. One of the days we met with some friends from Manitou, Colorado, and hiked on a trail. Now, I did go to college. I attended my mother's alma mater, Mount Holyoke, back in Massachusetts, and graduated in 1903. One Christmas, I invited my friends at college to come home to Ames with me. My Eastern friends thought that Ames was part of the Wild West. So I decided to play a trick on them. I told my brothers to meet our train dressed in feathers and war paint. My brothers did just exactly that. They even went one step beyond, driving us back home in a hayrack. Of course, once my friends knew it was a joke, they admitted that Ames was not as wild as they once thought. Now, in 1904, Iowa State College hired me as the Directress of Physical Culture for Women. Pretty fancy name, don't you think? They called it PE now. I was happy to put my interest in physical activity to good use in this new position. When I began in 1904, there were only a few dozen women in the whole program. But by the time I retired, 40 years later, there were thousands. I got started at a time when women were thought to be pretty fragile, and they couldn't have much physical activity, but I thought that was a bunch of nonsense. During my years at Iowa State, I instructed women's golf classes, developed the gymnastics curriculum, introduced competitive sports for women, and started the May Day festivals. May Day was something celebrated at Mount Holyoke, and I implemented those traditions at Iowa State beginning in 1907. I wrote and staged the first May Day pageant featuring women from the senior class. We also had a picnic, crowned a Queen of May, and of course the students danced around a maypole on Central Campus. In 1922, May Day events were incorporated into that new festival, Bisha, I think it was called. In 1918, I took 1 year of leave to help with World War I. I directed recreational activity in a nurses' camp in France as part of the YWCA program. I was happy to be of help, and I'm telling you, I was really happy to return back to Iowa State. I was a big proponent of women's competitive sports. I organized the Women's Athletic Association at Iowa State. My department offered hockey, basketball, tennis, swimming, archery, golf, along with developmental and corrective exercise classes. One of my greatest achievements during my time at Iowa State was the building of a physical education facility for women. I began pushing for such a building in 1916. It was almost built 12 years later in 1928, but it was taken out of the college's budget at the very last moment. I think all those old guys out of the legislature were still thinking women were just fragile. In 1938, a terrible fire destroyed Margaret Hall, which had housed the small gymnasium, swimming pool, and equipment we did have for use by women. So we really had to think how we could deal with this terrible problem. 3 of my students created a petition to convince legislators to approve funding for a women's gymnasium. They visited the State House in April 1939, and funding was finally approved that spring. The Women's Physical Education Building opened in 1941, a few years after we started in 1916. At any rate, women continued to compete, and man, I wish I had known that women's basketball and women's sports would be such a big thing by now. I'm really proud that the beginnings of all that took place during the years I was there. I retired in 1944 after 4 decades of working at Iowa State. Passed from this earth on July 4th, 1948. Gosh, what a great life I had in Ames. Thanks, everybody.
Hey everyone, I'm Hayden. I'm happy to be outside on this beautiful day. By the way, a good day to visit a prairie. I was born on a farm about 2 miles north of Ames on August 14, 1884. My family's farm was near what you know today as Hollow Road and Hoover Avenue. My parents, David and Christina, loved nature and preserved several acres of virgin prairie on our farm. What a wonderful playground that was. From a very young age, I was influenced by the natural flora of the prairie. We had wildflowers, apple and plum trees, crops of corn, oats, and sorghum on our farm. While I was in high school, I met Dr. Lewis Pamel, an Iowa State College professor. He had a beautiful house just over here in the 800 block of Douglas. Dr. Pamel was a conservationist and known as the father of the Iowa Park system. He encouraged me to pursue my interest in botany, and we became close friends. After graduation from Ames High in 1904, I studied under Dr. Pamel to earn my bachelor's degree in botany from Iowa State. I loved being active in college. I was class officer, honor student, member of the Literary Society, and participated on the women's basketball team. Following my education at Iowa State, I received a Master's of Science degree from Washington University in St. Louis. While in St. Louis, I studied at the Missouri Botanical Gardens. What a lovely place that is. I returned to Iowa State and taught botany while working on my PhD. I was the first woman to earn a PhD from Iowa State. That was in 1918. It was such an honor to see my hard work pay off. My life's work was prairie conservation, attempting to save Iowa's few remaining prairies. I was frequently quoted about the prairies as saying, "Why not preserve now at small cost what cannot be replaced later at any cost?" That was way back in 1919. In the 1920s, I began a project to prepare instructional slides for the botany department. I took photos of many plants and hand-colored the slides myself. This was a wonderful chance to use my photography and artistic skills. I'm especially fond of the Laritus plants with their long purple flower stalks. I was able to include several of those in the project. I continued to teach botany and plant pathology at Iowa State for the rest of my life. I loved to help my students learn about the plants, and I often brought them back to my family farm to study the different plant species. I also loved the research opportunities that came with being a professor. I studied and inventoried the native prairies in the state. studied the vegetation of lakes and marshes in relation to the feeding and nesting of wild waterfowl, and published many papers and other publications. After studying the remaining prairies of Iowa, by 1944, I had suggested 22 of them for the state of Iowa to purchase and preserve. They took my advice and preserved many of them. In fact, one of them is named after me, the Hayden Prairie State Preserve in northern Howard County, Iowa. My work aided in having 26 native prairie areas preserved by the state of Iowa. In 1947, I was named curator of the Iowa State Herbarium, a plant library containing dried and pressed plants. During my time at Iowa State, I contributed more than 40,000 specimens to the library. It was renamed in my honor back in 1988 and is now known as the Ada Hayden Herbarium. Another honor is that the city of Ames has named a park after me. Ada Hayden Heritage Park in North Ames. This is really quite near my family's original farm. I am pleased that this area has been saved and the prairie has been restored to allow current Ames residents to enjoy nature as I did throughout my life. Just this May, 8 interpretive signs were added, providing more information on the park features such as the wetlands, the native prairie areas, and how the lake functions as a backup water source for this growing city. I passed away on August 12, 1950, and am buried near here. I hope you will take time to enjoy and learn about the preserved and restored prairie areas found throughout the state of Iowa. Thank you for being here today.
Good afternoon. It's not quite the seventh ending, but if you'd like to stand up and give a nice old-fashioned stretch, do so. My name is Nancy Chandler Martin, and my story begins now. I was born a slave on May 22nd, 1855, in Newman, Georgia. 9 years later, Ames was platted, so it didn't exist when we came. Life as a slave was extremely difficult. After the Emancipation Proclamation, we thought life would be a dream. Not so. We made the decision to move to Ames, looking for freedom and a better way of life. We changed our name from Candler to Chandler to remove the slavehood from our name, so that we would not hear the name and be reminded that we had once been someone's property. In 1886, I married Archie Martin in Estelle, Georgia, just northwest of Atlanta. Life there was still hard. I was cooking and managing a restaurant about 1913 when I met two Ames doctors, David and Jenny Grist. I distinctly remember Jenny saying to me, "There's plenty of money in Ames. You should consider moving there." After some time, we decided to do just that. And we moved to Ames with high expectations. We were one of Ames' earliest African-American families to move here. Archie found work with the railroad, Chicago Northwestern. In those days, they paid very well. I don't know about the standards today, but for previous slaves, we thought we had hit a gold mine. I cooked for a Greek house on campus, then known as Iowa State College of Agriculture and Mechanic Arts. We now know it as Iowa State University. Goodness, in the winter, it got pretty darn cold up north there, right? So we used coal and wood to keep us warm in an old pot-bellied stove. We thought we had it made, compared to what we have today. I liked cooking for my family, particularly their favorite dishes. Some of their favorites, fried sweet potato pie, oyster stew, and yes, of course, fried chicken, and cobbler made from the fruits of the trees in our backyard. The children and running the house kept me ever so busy. You can imagine raising 12 children, 12 boys and 5 girls. 4 of those were from my first marriage to Mr. Simmons. In 1919, Archie and I bought a piece of land, and with the help of our sons, we built a nice house with lots of room and a large front porch. I do love sitting on the porch. This house is still standing today at 218 Lincoln Way. Many of you have probably passed it and wanted to know, what is that house still sitting there for? Well, I'm about to tell you. There were houses all around us. Of course, anything past Grandon was non-existent, mostly, except Iowa State. We lived close to the school. Lincoln Elementary School was across the alley and behind our house, so our kids did not have to ride a bike, they did not have to catch a bus, and I did not have to be a soccer mom. There seemed to be so many children attending that school, more than I had imagined. I remember the mobile gas station across Lincoln Way, and there was a windmill-shaped food stand east of the gas station and across our front porch. Sometimes I would take my glass pitcher and I would go over there and fill it up with root beer, and we had a special treat for the children there. Oh yes, there were grandchildren too. 31 in fact, 12 children, what do you expect? All of them sweethearts. We loved seeing them playing on the rope swings in the backyard. Our front porch was the center of activity with the grandchildren and the great-grands. We used to watch the cars go by because, of course, Archie and I did not have the finances to buy a car. We either walked or we didn't go. Some of those cars went as far as California using the Lincoln Highway, which is still there today. Back in the day, it was only 2 lanes. So you can imagine all those cars coming and going there. By the time you caught one, there was another one coming. So all you did was back and forth, and trying to figure out where are all these people going in such a hurry. Archie and I tried to live our lives as kind and caring people, helping others in need as we could. When we learned that black students were not provided on-campus housing at Iowa State, we shared our home with us. Thus, the reason for the little white house still standing. Although neither of us had any formal education, we knew that education was the key to success. The upstairs of the house had 3 bedrooms and a bathroom for the students. Just after World War I, there were so many students, we couldn't house them all. So Archie twice went to speak with President Pearson about the need of our campus housing for black students. It was not until 1940s that it became common for them to live on the campus. Sometimes the students staying with us didn't really know what college was all about or even how to study. We wanted them to do well in their classes, so we gave them room and board, and we tried to help them learn to be organized and disciplined. That was the only way they would be successful students. I cleaned their rooms and fed them sit-down meals with my pink depression glasses and drinking wear. We tried to give them a home away from home because they were far from family. I guess it worked. A number of them became very distinguished individuals. There was James Bowman, who served with the Tuskegee Institute Airmen, and later was a Des Moines school administrator. Then there was James Massey. He worked on the Manhattan Project and later became the first black professor at the U.S. Navy Academy. Imagine that. We shouldn't forget about Frederick Patterson, who founded the United Negro Fund and was president of Tuskegee University. Oh, and what about Harold Rusby, who became superintendent of schools in Seattle, Washington? Well, there were others, but at my age, I can't remember all of them. You know, I'm past 100. We had an old upright piano. Back in the day, it was not piano, it was piano. But neither Archie and I could play a tune. But the students entertained us using our piano and their instruments. And oh, how we loved having music in the home. There was jazz, there was ragtime, there was blues, and of course, there was hymns. I think it gave them an escape from their studies, and we loved it. Music at the Church of the Nazarene was enjoyed by all of our family. Nellie and I were part of the Christmas program there. Nellie and I were part of the Christmas program there. And the entire congregation took part in it. Archie and I loved to work in our garden, nurturing the vegetables and pulling weeds to keep it neat and tidy. You know, Iowa has rich soil, so we had plenty of vegetables. The garden supplied lots of food for us and those Iowa State students, because most of them were men and they had big appetites. But then my heart couldn't take it anymore. I died on May 17, 1947, at the age of 91, just 5 days short of my 92nd birthday. So welcome to my home now. Thank you for coming. Enjoy your walk around. I never dreamed I would have such a long and fulfilling life, even after death. From slavery to moving to Iowa, to building that house and helping others obtain an education. Who could imagine so many changes in one person's life? I've seen us go from no sidewalks to sidewalks, to no transportation except for a horse or a mule, to four-wheel drives, and F-150. All of this, I just shake my head and say, thank God you allowed me to be in somebody else's life of positivity. Thank you.
Good afternoon on this beautiful spring day.
I'm Sarah Emery Gossard, and I'm so glad so many of you could come out and learn about some great women who shaped the city of Ames. It shows that you're curious and eager to learn. And as a former teacher, I love people who like to learn. My family came here from Ohio. My father, Thomas Emery, was involved with the Underground Railroad there. Our house was a stopping point, and we helped many runaway slaves on their way to Canada and freedom. We made it to the Mississippi River on our way to Iowa and had to find a boat to get us across. We found one at Keokuk in 1857. We then headed to central Iowa by wagon and settled near Nevada. The next year, in 1858, I took my first teaching position a couple miles south of Nevada. I wasn't quite 18 and I was a little nervous, this being the first time I taught, but I was determined to do my best. I had gone to a ladies' seminary in Pennsylvania, near where my grandfather lived, but I didn't know much about teaching. I stayed there about 3 years. During that time, a new town was starting a few miles west of Nevada. Lucian Q. Hoggett donated some land for a school, and after it was built, it was named Hoggett School. I'm so glad to hear that the town has preserved it and can show the students now how school was way back then. The school was ready for the summer term by June 1862. Back then, it cost just $121.72 to build. I would hate to think how much a school would cost today to build. I was hired to teach 10 students from 2 families, the Hoggetts and the Fitzpatricks. I'm sure you have many more students now than I did. I boarded my first year with the Fitzpatrick family. Mr. Fitzpatrick was the farm manager for Iowa State College Farm, and they lived in what is now referred to as the farmhouse. It was a lovely house, and so new back then. It was during the next couple of years I met my husband, Thomas N. Gossard. His family were farmers between Ames and Nevada. He spent a few months fighting in the Civil War and was home for about a year before enlisting again. I was so proud of him for defending our country, but was worried when he left again in February 1864. He managed to get a furlough and came home, and we were married on July 4th, 1865. What a day to celebrate every year, our marriage and Independence Day. The war was nearly over and he had to leave for a while, but was back by fall. When Thomas came home, I left teaching and we began our life together farming. In the next 8 years, we had 4 children, 1 girl and 3 boys. Oh, it was a very busy time. Thomas was busy building his dream farmstead, and I was busy with the children. I tried to keep up my teaching skills with the children and also taught Sunday school. We practiced spelling and math and read books. We had a wonderful time. Living so close to Ames, of course, our children attended Iowa State College. Harry, our oldest son, received a bachelor's and master's degree in 1889. We were so proud of him. He moved to Ohio and was an entomologist. Why anyone would study insects is beyond me, but to each his own, I guess. Will graduated in 1895 and taught school, and later he worked in the post office in Webster City. Our youngest, Thomas, went for a while but left school to begin working in the newspaper and printing business. Our daughter, Blanche, took a few classes at Iowa State College, but she finished her education at the Iowa State Normal School in Cedar Falls. In 1890, I lost my dear husband Thomas to a heart condition that was aggravated by rheumatism. He wasn't even 48 years old. Unfortunately, I had to sell our farm and livestock. Our son Harry helped with that. He was such a godsend. With the sale of the farm and other monies I had, I was able to buy a house in Ames so Thomas could attend Iowa State College. Thomas later married and moved to Ottawa and bought a printing business. Later, Blanche and I moved there also to be close and help out when we could. Blanche got a job at the county newspaper, and it was such a joy to be near my grandchildren and once again enjoy teaching children. I lived the rest of my life in Ottawa. In 1935, I celebrated my 95th birthday. I never thought I would live so long without my husband Thomas. It had been 45 years. Shortly after that party, I left to be with Thomas. I was buried beside him here in this beautiful cemetery, and our children and their spouses are here too. Well, that's the story of my life. I had a full and rewarding life, and the students I taught and the family I raised. I watched this town grow into a thriving metropolis, and I see it's even bigger now. All I can impart is keep learning and growing. You'll never regret it. Thank you.